Welcome to our conference, our inaugural conference. We're so pleased to hear and see so many people here from various organisations, backgrounds, experiences, and countries. My name is Dawn Harris, and
good afternoon, folks, and I am Alex O'Donnell.
You've seen it in your programmes. Epione was the name that came from the goddess of soothing pain. So we thought that was quite an apt name to put to a company in which it's associated with treating people with histories of trauma, talking about trauma, raising awareness of trauma, and that's why we came up with the name Epione. So we hope you think it's quite fitting as well. And in having light bulb moments that are going off for you, whether it be about yourself or about the people that you work with, we're hoping that somewhere along the line you're gaining new information and forming new ideas about the way forward in your practice, or just about understanding yourself in and of itself. We think that there is a growing awareness, particularly in Scotland, of trauma, and there is a great movement that has been established that's really helping us to be more aware of trauma. However, the reason that Alex and I came to decide to put on this conference is we didn't feel that there was such a movement about how to respond to that trauma. Once we were aware of it, what we meant to do next. And that came from us travelling around Scotland and speaking to many practitioners. So we came up with the idea of a What Works conference. And for those that are in the forensic setting, it comes from What Works, Reducing Reoffending. And we thought that in order for people to think about how they respond to trauma, I try to put myself in the shoes of various people. I mean, I'm a trauma specialist, I suppose. I work with trauma all the time. And I think when you're faced with such horrific pain and toxic stress, as James was talking about, it can be really hard sometimes not to feel as if you want to run away or to avoid things or to ignore it, or feel so overwhelmed that you don't know what to do in response to that person's pain. However, we're hoping that this conference is helping you to realise that with the right motivation, the right energy and the right willingness, but particularly the right heart, that you can actually learn how to respond to trauma in a way that really helps a lot of people that have experienced such horrific lives. Pass you on to Alex.
Yeah, I totally agree with what Dawn's saying. I mean, we're delighted it was highlighted by Warren today. We've got colleagues from Scottish Government that we've actually put this in a commitment for Scotland, which is really progressive, and that we're moving in the right direction. I would also mention again, NHS Education Scotland, who are giving us a national trauma training framework. And undoubtedly, as we've heard this morning, unequivocally, the best pound is spent on prevention. And as a father, with my son and my daughter, I want them, like every other child, to grow up to be happy, to be secure, to be connected. I get hairs on the back of my neck when I talk like that, because the thing is, getting introduced to this work also made me think about how I was as a parent, because there's a real personal aspect to it as well, and James was talking about that, how we communicate, how when my daughter's looking in my eyes, she's connecting with me. So that's definitely the best investment. However, the work that Dawn and I are going to share with you today has been looking at people who are within adult services, because we've absolutely got hundreds of thousands of mums, of dads, of people that are coming into our services all the time who have got a history of trauma and starting to think how responsive those services are. How safe are they for people to come in and engage? And that is really, really important for us. When I think about the pursuit and the change of this, sometimes I get overwhelmed because, this is a 10 to 15 year shift. This isn't a short shift. If you're looking at this, what we're talking about, and sometimes it's easy to balk and go, do you know what, let's just stick with the way it is. But I can't live with that. And I think today there's a real appetite in the audience to say, no, it has to change. And for me, we owe it to everyone who's ever experienced trauma, who lives in this country, that we recognise their pain and that we know what to do when that person presents looking for help. And ultimately, how do we become the humans and the organisations for the people that we need and we serve?
Okay, so we're now going to talk about paradigm shift. Now, we're conscious of the fact that we've just had lunch, so we are going to have a slight bit of an exercise. Don't all panic, because I know there is 438 people in this room. However, if I can just ask everybody, apart from the first 7 rows, to stand up. Just everyone just stand up, apart from the first 7 rows. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. Yeah, so perfect. Okay, now, if you look around you, if you can, if you're tall enough, if you can just see how many people are standing, that is actually, it's a bit more now, but it's about 70% of the room. And from studies, we know that people that access psychiatric and psychological outpatient services, about 70%, literature, I think it's more, have a history of trauma. So in this room today, there's a potential that this many people have experienced trauma. I personally would probably ask another 3 rows to stand up over and above that. That is how many people we are in our communities that we're talking to every day, unknown or not, that have experienced a history of trauma. You can all sit down now. Thank you very much. So, as we look around, and you look around how many people there were today that had experienced trauma, we just can't ignore that anymore, can we? We just cannot look away, deny that it exists, dissociate from it ourselves. We need to do something about this. And these conferences and others that are around are starting in that process of us trying to do something for people that have experienced difficulties and horrendous circumstances in their life. Now, I talked about the fact that we are now more trauma aware. However, in order to be trauma responsive is the next step. And we don't think, Alex and I in Epione, that that is a tick box exercise. We do think that that is something that is a paradigm shift, and it's something that's a way of being. It means that we change in our organizational cultures, let alone in our societies and in our communities. We need to try to weave in the fact that we have the knowledge of trauma as well as a response to trauma. We need to weave that into the tapestry of our communities, of our understanding, who we are as individuals as well as who we are as communities. Because if we don't have a movement like this, if we don't have a cohesive direction, then we're all going to go in different directions and things are never going to change. Conferences like this are going to just be no use. We're just going to all turn up, have a day of listening to excellent speakers, and then we're going to go away and not doing very much about it. So we feel that we need a huge amount of willingness and energy and commitment to be able to move forward in this paradigm shift that we require to look at people through the eyes of the trauma-informed lens that we've hopefully learned about, read about, and that James himself has spoken about from his own experiences today. If we see people from a perspective of a human being to a human being, then that in actual fact creates in itself a change in our relationship and therefore helps to change that individual in themselves. If we believe in people, then that in itself can be a change agent. So, we need something that's cohesive, innovative, creative, in order to progress the paradigm shift. And I really like a poem by D.H. Lawrence in 1971, wrote a poem called Change. And within it he said, "Do you think that it's easy to change? Alas, it is hard to change and be different. It means passing through the waters of oblivion," which I thought was an extraordinary quote in terms of our own oblivion. We can no longer just turn our backs and be oblivious to the amount of trauma that exists, let alone that we are not responding to it in the ways that we need to help people to move forward. I'll pass on to Alex.
Yeah, and the great news, if there's good news round about this, you know, whilst there's a real appetite that we've heard about today in Scotland and a movement and a galvanising, when we start to look at the lens in an international perspective, we are not alone. I mean, it gives me great pleasure to have Bruce Perry this afternoon. I started in 1999 as a youth justice worker, and I was engaging with young people within Tory Glen, the circuit, and I was armed with me, because it was all about a relationship. That was all you had, it was relational, and we worked within the community. So we've had originators like Bruce Perry that have been travelling this journey for about the last 30 years. If you look at the Blue Knot Foundation just now in Australia, in the Centre of Excellence, so let's not think that whilst this is great that we're moving, we've got so many people. We've got Sandra Bloom in the Sanctuary model who have been able to demonstrate and show these models. We've got trauma-informed and trauma-responsive Ohio. So we were lucky enough to talk to Bruce Perry through Kate Silverton for an interview, and just looking at the magnitude, because you start to take it out with Scotland. The good news about that, when somebody tests something out, it gives you emergent evidence. You start to see the results. And people were saying today, so much we're actually addressing the manifestations. Karen spoke about it. We've got 8,236 people today locked up in prison. I know that because I manage a prison and I have to check the national population every single day. And when I go there, I see people from an impoverished background who are struggling, who have grown up in the circumstances that James eloquently described, and we are warehousing the sick. And we've created, if you think about it, mental silos between mental health, justice, where people are mad and bad. We've labelled them, and I think as human beings, we get a comfort in that. When we're scared and we don't know what to do, we create systems round about it. So this is a big change, because we're going to start to do it, but we've got an international perspective, and we've got some phenomenal voices in Scotland just now that are taking that forward, and it's really important. You know, the moment Joe Federaro reframed, you know, the point, he said, it's not what's wrong with you, it's what happened to you. And I lost that for a second. Wee stress response system there, wee heartbeat was like, where's the words?
You say every day.
Yeah. There's how to know to be in the moment is to stand in front of 400 people. That does kind of center you. That shift and being able to see that, and again, Warren cited, you know, I took a couple of facts here for Mark Bellis, you know, looking at preventing trauma. So it could reduce violence perpetration by 52%, incarceration by 53%, because our prisons we've got everybody locked up, and heroin and crack cocaine by 59%, to have a healthier society, and that would save us billions. So I think it was spelled out this morning that there's no doubt about it, that if we get unsure, there's a bigger picture here to go, and we need to do that all together.
Okay. Panic. So Alex and I are going to be talking to you about some training that we developed that was trauma-informed and trauma-responsive training. And we have travelled throughout Scotland training various people in various disciplines in this training, some of which you will be hearing from today. And we thought as we were delivering it that it would be good if we could find out if it was actually working or not. And rather than us looking ourselves at evaluating our own training, we actually commissioned somebody from, and I don't know how to pronounce this name, and I hope I've pronounced it right, but Griesbach and Associates, who completed an independent thematic analysis on our training. And the purpose of the study was just to conduct a first stage thematic analysis of what we had been delivering. Our next stage is to go on to follow up participants just to see how they are actually integrating the training into their practice. But before we go on, it's just to let you know that the history behind all of this was that I had been commissioned by the Scottish Government to write a treatment programme for people who had committed sexual offences. And I'd done so a number of years ago now, but I'd done it from a trauma-informed perspective. It was quite a bold move at the time because there wasn't a lot of literature around at that time talking about using a trauma-informed neurobiological perspective to work with people in a group work setting in prison and in the community. And during that time, I met the wonderful Alex, and together, I noticed that he was an amazing trainer, and so together we rolled out the training of Moving Forward, Making Changes in Scotland. As we were rolling this out and teaching people about trauma and about the neurobiology of trauma that has been eloquently covered by a variety of our speakers this morning, what we found is that people were saying, we just are underconfident in working with people with a history of trauma. We know about it. We know that many of the people that we're working with are traumatized, but we don't want to ask about it because we don't know what to do next. And so we had our own light bulb moment, and in that time we thought, why don't we help people to understand a bit more about trauma, to make our training more trauma specific than we had been rolling out the treatment program, because there was only a part of that was about understanding the neurobiology of trauma. It wasn't about working specifically with people on their trauma. So from that developed our training that we were looking at trauma-informed and trauma-responsive practice. And trauma-informed is about raising an awareness, so it's about understanding trauma, whereas trauma-responsive is about the doing. So we always see that as the theory to practice. Trauma-informed is excellent, but then trauma-responsive is more important to be able to respond to people in a particular way, so to help them to move forward. So from that, we realized that in regard to changing, people required a sort of almost an organizational perspective, and that we needed to think about how do we actually get across to more people our message about trauma-informed and trauma-responsive practice, and hence we came up with this conference. I think it was a number of months ago now, and it seemed like a good idea at the time. It has been exceptionally hard work and traumatic in itself. However, we're really pleased that we've done this today, because we think that in order for Scotland to become trauma responsive, which is what the title of the conference is about, we need changes in organisational cultures, we need changes in our behaviours, we need changes in our structures, and we need changes in our processes. We can't do that as individuals, just ourselves within our organisations. We need almost like a mass movement at various hierarchical levels within our society, from the top all the way down to the bottom, in whatever way you want to think about that. But we need something that's cohesive, that's coherent, so that we can actually help people to change their lives. And also, maybe as Alex was saying at the beginning, and as James has pointed out this morning, we need to be making sure that there are no children that grow up within environments that are traumatic. And to do that, we really need a significant paradigm shift.
So we set off, and our journey, we went through a number of local authorities. The training we were doing is the NEST Level 3, which is enhanced. So when we're going to tell you a bit about it, this is going to be workers from addiction services, prison services, health services, housing services, who were in constant contact with people with a history of trauma. Every day they say I work with people that are on my caseload, whether I'm engaging with them, and that was the sample. We managed to get over just under, let me see, what was our numbers in relation? Yeah, let me turn around. 192 people front line. Now, our managers was 19%, okay? Becoming trauma responsive means that you really need to ensure that this is put in at a managerial level and above, and that that's encapsulated. Sandra Bloom says that, trying to do it without that is like throwing seeds on dry land. You need to cultivate. There's been 2 authorities who have been extremely progressive in their thinking, and that's allowed engagement with elected members, heads of service, and they are saying, okay, we understand this shift and that we've made a commitment to that. The thing that really kind of struck us when we were talking to people is, one, they were saying, we're really not sure kind of what to do. There was a lot of people around about diagnosis, and that is so well covered today. I'll only say it because Alistair has said it, because I read a paper recently talking about the diagnosis and the labelling of people and how it can be scientifically meaningless. Now, I would only say that because he can back it up. I'm not a scientist or a doctor that can, but so many people don't know what to do, and they're finding these people that are entering their services. The people we spoke to were phenomenal, absolutely phenomenal. Their desire to do a better job, but the one thing that came out time and time again is, and it comes through in some of the quotations of the qualitative analysis, is that they found, and it's Edward Durnan that says, you know, a bad system will always beat a good person. And they felt absolutely crippled. But we thought, how can we spend meaningful time with them to try and equip them with the best tools possible? So that gave us a sample size, and then it also gave us a bit of a petrol bill as well, as we managed to get all the way. We've still to go up north, but it gave us a good sample.
So, these are the findings. There are a lot more findings than this, but it would take a whole presentation to talk about the findings of the thematic analysis. But what we found is that prior to coming on the course, 43% of people felt that their knowledge of trauma-informed practice was about satisfactory. After the training, 86% felt it was either good or excellent post-training. And then we found that 182 out of the 190 people that attended the training felt it was valuable learning and development. But there were 5 main themes that came out of the thematic analysis. And they were knowledge and confidence, theory to practice, relationships, self-care, and leadership. Now, in regard to the knowledge and confidence, we heard time and time again, I don't want to ask anybody about their trauma because it's going to open up a can of worms. And now, I'm sure you've heard this many, many times, or may have said it yourself many, many times. But we now know, of course, that's a fallacy. That in actual fact, in order to speak with somebody with a history of trauma, actually listening to their story for the first time, just listening to them, is about them being seen and heard, probably for the first time in their lives. And James was talking about that this morning. You're not going to open up a can of worms. I mean, how worse can that person's life get? So if you're going to talk to them, just listening to them and seeing them for the first time, letting them be heard for the first time, that in of itself is the change agent. So what we were actually trying to think about is how we could help people to overcome this underconfidence about being unable to ask about trauma. So knowledge and confidence was one of the themes that came out, that people felt they had learned the most. They also felt that they could actually take the theory that we were teaching them and put it into practice, and we used a variety of interactive exercises to do that. So our first day was all about theory, and the second day is all about putting that into practice. Because as we all know, you can go to universities, colleges, schools, offices, wherever you want, no matter what theory you are told, it's always more difficult to put that into practice. So we're providing a safe environment in which people could do that within the training. Relationships, we've talked about relationships. All speakers have talked about relationships and how important they are when you're working with somebody with a history of trauma. That is my, I suppose, you could call it my USP, but not really, but it's something that I think I use all the time in my own work. I may be trained in a variety of psychotherapeutic modalities, and I understand the knowledge, I understand the theory and the science, but what I use most of all is myself. That is the most important part of our relationship with somebody. The fact that we can look them in the eye and they don't see anger, or they don't see impatience, or they don't see judgment, or they don't see anything else that says, I am bad. They see, you are worthwhile. You are worth the time for me to sit here with you and listen to what you are saying to me. And if that's all that I can do, then hopefully that's enough. And often it is. The people that I work with, some of whom are here today, often talk about the fact that it's the relationship that they have with me that makes a difference. It's not about the fact that I know all these other therapies, it's about their relationship with me that makes the difference, and it's that I'm there when they need me. And then self-care, we've all talked about, we all know about the fact that we don't look after ourselves. As therapists, we are the worst people in the world at looking after ourselves. We are terrible, we work through lunch. We do other things that really don't help us. And so we were talking to people about self-care and leadership. We talked to people about leadership and being bold and being courageous in taking forward the message that we need to be more trauma-informed.
Okay, I've just noticed we've got 10 minutes. It's absolutely rattled in, and we have all had so much information to impart today that we've struggled to do that in the time. So we're just going to kind of lift up the pace a little bit. When we meet workers in the room, the first thing we do is we introduce them to this image here. The image is kintsugi, which is the Japanese philosophy. And we actually get workers, because it's about how do you, everything that Dawn just explained there, how do you graft that onto somebody's mind? And this is the first point that we use, is talking about that. And the philosophy is based on the premise that something that's put back together is absolutely more beautiful, is absolutely stronger and more resilient in its newest form than it originally was when it was a pristine vase. And the reality is, you know, there's cracks there, and they represent the restoration process. If you're involved in therapeutic modalities, you'll be also thinking about putting the parts of self back again, and it transfers onto that. So we can understand this process. We can also have a dialogue about, if it's about relationships, where are we in that mending process? How do we involve ourselves in that? And it's really, really important, and we've found that people get that across. This brings us back to one of the themes is, you know, we all have cracks. Put your hand up if your vase is absolutely perfect and pristine and you have absolutely no cracks. Thank God somebody never put their hand up. I did just say that's great. We all want that. Yeah, so it acknowledges that every single one of us, we have our own cracks, and that's what makes us pretty much unique. But it's also important when we're going to talk about how that comes into the room when we're engaging and we're working with others. So that transformative power of putting back together, if we can think about that in that art forum, it's what we epitomise in the work that we do. We do not define humans as broken or trauma as an illness, and that we must view people in terms of strength and resiliency. It's all about healing our emotional wounds and rebuilding our lives.
In terms of we had various themes, and our first theme was knowledge and confidence. So this is a quote from one of the people that was on our training, and they had said, I feel more confident now and competent to work with people who have experienced trauma, and I'm not scared to open up that can of worms. So that was good news. So, oh my God, you're joking. Right, okay, so, right, okay.
That was, oh my God, you're joking.
Can I just go on to the next one? Right, okay, Alex, and I knew this was going to happen. It always happens in training, and we're always having to go at each other, and I'm so sorry that it's happened at this conference.
It's all about relationships.
It is about relationships. So, the neurobiology, we teach people about the neurobiology of trauma, and we've all heard about that this morning from various speakers, but we also know neuroplasticity means that it provides hope, and that people can actually heal from their past. And we also, what we found out is that people are not to be afraid of trauma. So what we say to people is, don't be afraid of trauma, because it's more afraid of you. We also talk about, I think a few speakers have been talking about it this morning, the behaviours are coping mechanisms. The behaviours that we see, like people getting angry at us, or people in chaos, or not turning up for appointments, or we call them treatment resistant. We say they're not motivated to change. We feel they're very difficult. That's them telling us something. That is their coping mechanisms. And rather than engaging with them punitively and saying, well, if you don't turn up for another appointment, I'm going to discharge you from my case, or you're going to get breached on a probation order, maybe we actually need to be thinking about what lies beneath that behaviour. Feelings. And what lies beneath feelings? Needs. So we need to figure out what it is that person is needing from us, as opposed to a punitive approach. Compassion rather than shaming and labelling. So rather than labelling, as Alex was talking about, we need to engage people with compassion. Easier said than done. And not only recognise their trauma, but also what to do next and not to re-traumatise. So the knowledge and confidence came from helping people on our training to actually learn about how to cope with disclosure.
Thank you. I love that when we went to people and we spoke to them, they would always say, now what do I do? Because really, it's about theory to practice and making sure that when they get this information, they're able to put it into practice. We only train small groups, and the reason that we do that is so that we can actually spend time coaching with them. You've heard a lot today about people's window of tolerance and the agitated state that we know as hyperarousal, and the lower state we know as being dissociated or numbed out or flat, whatever you want to describe that process as. That's all very well. Our concern is when you're sitting in the room and you're working with somebody who's going to be in that kind of agitated state, and so that you don't end up viewing that as a negative. So we've been working on looking at the sympathetic and parasympathetic breath through mindfulness breathing. So we get workers to practice that and be able to guide people that they're working with, because that's one of the ways to kind of cool a stress response system. The harder way practitioners or people will always say is what was about when people are numbed out and dissociated. We start to talk about techniques using movement, using stimulation, using tapping, trying to bring them back into the room so that you're in that state where you can actually hear and be in your body at the same time. Because if you can do that, then you're able to engage. So many of our services go straight to your prefrontal cortex, all about reason and thinking. When the people that are presenting are switched off, that's not happening.
Okay, because we're running out of time, I'm just going to read this to you because it's about relationships. And this is what somebody wrote to me after a session with me. She said, this is a person with complex trauma. It's beautiful when you find someone who is not afraid of your mind. Someone that wants to watch you slowly take down all the walls you've built up around your mind and let them inside. I think you said that was acceptance, and that's what I was feeling. And I think that sums that up. You accept me, regardless of everything. Sometimes you can't explain what you see in a person. It's just the way they take you to a place where no one else can. I think you took me to that place last week. I don't know yet what it's called, but I know that when this is all over, that's where I want to be.
Okay, so we've spoke a lot about relationships and that we're biologically predisposed to be relational and the importance of doing that. The challenge is that normally developmental trauma happens within the relationships. The people that are most to care and love for you have harmed you. So trying to create that relationship of safety and security, it requires a lot of work and time and patience. This was one of the next big themes that came out because we're running out of time, but it's really important that I tell you about this because we used the Paul Gilbert's model, Mindfulness Compassion. And when we were introduced, and I won't go through explaining it, and it has been covered this morning, and you're able to see the slides, we were asking workers predominantly, what zone are you coming from? And they were saying to us, I'm operating a lot of the time from the red zone. That's what I feel dysregulated. And the question is, can a dysregulated adult help co-regulate another adult or a child? That raises some questions about some of the challenges within the workplace. And it's also one of these quotes here that expecting that we can be immersed in suffering and loss daily and not be touched by it is as unrealistic as expecting to be able to walk through water without getting wet. We really need to invest in our workforce. This is the bit here that keeps me up, because I get all the trauma-informed and trauma-responsive, but the workers, if they're the most important, how are we looking and caring for them? And everything that we say today about somebody with a history of trauma is equally applicable to the worker sitting in the room as well. Just like lightning, a latent spark of light always awaits the readiness to connect with even the smallest light of love each of us has to offer. Whether a simple smile, a warm hello, or an empathic understanding, a small kindness can make a big difference to a dormant soul. Ladies and gentlemen, we've just given you a sneak preview of what we're delivering in Scotland. I'm looking forward to the remainder of the conference. The future of how it goes forward will involve every single one of us to write our own history, to be part of something. And I'm delighted we had the opportunity to speak to you for a short time today.
Thank you very much.